As Dan said, my name is Shane Baird. I'm a ambulatory large animal veterinarian on the west side of Denver. Cover almost all of Jefferson County into Clear Creek, Gilpin, some into Boulder County, and Adams a little bit. So, as I said, I'm with Mobile Veterinary Services. Just a little bit of background on me. I was born and raised in Idaho. Horses have been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I left Idaho and came to Colorado, and I've been here for about 20 years now. See no reason to leave at this point. As far as my interest on horses, I have primarily reduced myself only to trail riding. Don't do much other eventing, roping or anything like that anymore. I just enjoy being a horseman and enjoy being around horses. That said, my disclaimer on this, I will cover kind of broad spectrum, some poultry stuff, but I am a horse person and a horse veterinarian, so the other items are added. This is a horse named Montana. This was a client horse, a nice little case of hoarfrost. So the question comes is, how much heat does a horse need? And just as far as the construct of kind of what Jeff and I are going to try and do here is, I'm going to go through and set forth what do the animals need, and then Jeff will start talking about how can we provide that for them, and provide that for them safely. If you look out, any of your horses that are out in the wind, most of them will just turn their tail into the wind and stand there and kind of take it. Horses' coats will actually start to build the snow. As you can see, this little mini has quite a layer of snow over it. That means that the heat from the body is not escaping and causing a melting action on the snow. So that horse is actually quite warm. With a good winter coat, horses can tolerate down to about 18 degrees without burning calories to stay warm. If they've got a summer coat, 41 is usually the number that we start talking about. And that's presuming a dry animal. Below that temperature, below 18 degrees Fahrenheit, we will start actually burning calories to stay warm. And this is, again, it's presuming a nice, healthy, average horse, no sickness, of middle age, say, not a really youngster or not a geriatric. In my research for this project, I found it interesting that, and I found this number a number of times, that to increase your feed percent by 1% for every degree below 18 degrees. So round numbers, at 0 degrees, feed them 2 pounds more of hay. That's really not that much more feed. But you can really increase your heat generation by a horse by increasing that feed. Cattle, sheep, goats, all of the ruminant types, as well as horses, their heat comes from digestion. It's an exothermic process. It actually creates heat. And so people will say, well, I want to feed some more grain. It's not the best idea in the world. The better idea is more forage, more roughage, because it takes the bacteria to digest that, and that bacterial process releases heat into the horse. So then I'll come to another, this is just a little side note, I guess, to blanket or not blanket, because it is, I get asked it on a very regular basis. And the honest truth is there are a few factors that are important, but if they have good shelter and they're of a healthy status, they should be just fine. If for other reasons, if we're under 5 degrees and they've got no shelter, you might help them out a little bit. The problem is that insulative factor of the hair coat, that big air cushion that is developed, gets crushed as soon as you put a heavy blanket on them. And so their natural insulative capabilities are gone. Or not gone, but reduced. Obviously, if you've clipped your horse, help them out, use a blanket. My own personal experience when I bought my horse in Texas and brought him up here in October, he wasn't a real happy camper. It took him 2 years to really decide he wanted to grow a real winter coat. So if there are recent relocations, and then the obvious ones, the very skinny, undernourished, old, or the very young, the babies, they're very prone to frostbites. And then barns, as far as heating barns for horses, and this goes for all livestock species. My personal experience, that a good barn with good ventilation, I've seen temps that are sub-zero, and you walk in and the thermometer in the barn reads 30, 35 degrees. Horses generate a lot of heat, and they can keep their building warm without adding extra heat to it, and increasing our fire danger. As I said, ventilation is of the utmost importance when we're talking horses, even cattle, and if we kind of slip into production side, whether it's poultry, pigs, goats, sheep, ventilation, if we're getting too much buildup, we're going to cause respiratory issues in the animals. And to really ventilate a barn properly, we need to have a full air exchange every hour, which it seems like a lot to dump a bunch of energy into heat loss if you work on heating that barn and then ventilate it that well. And Jeff can probably give us the science and the numbers behind how to calculate how much energy you're burning. Like I said, the poor ventilation, if you box that thing up, lock it in, you're asking for disease, spread of disease, especially if you're in a boarding facility where you've got horses coming in and out. We're looking down, I think tomorrow is the National Western Parade, and it's a breeding ground. I'll have dozens of calls over the next 2 weeks of respiratory illness. Not because of stock show, but just all of these horses coming into one common area. And everyone, it's kind of like throwing all the kids into kindergarten. Everyone comes home with something. Ammonia levels, if you've ever been into those barns where they're really locked up and you can just, it kind of blasts you in the face, and that's just due to poor ventilation. And poor, not poor management, but mismanagement. We need a little bit better manure removal and get rid of the urine and the feces a little faster. Again, I'll leave the disclaimer, I'm a horse person, but I did need to include some dog stuff. Domestic animals, the cats and the dogs, some are made for the snow, some are not. And I did request the help of Jefferson County Animal Control, who I do work with a fair amount, as far as the legal requirements within Colorado. Livestock do not require shelter, as far as from a law standpoint. In Jefferson County, shelter is required for pets, for the cats and the dogs. Decks and sheds being able to run under is not adequate. The appropriate sized, however you want to define that, and they often recommend an insulated doghouse or the igloo style where we can use the ground. In an ideal world, these are recommendations by the AVMA, the American Veterinary Medical Association. Ideally, they come inside in severe weather. Otherwise, give them a shelter. And when you set that shelter up, think about your prevailing winds, think about your insulation, insulate from the ground, insulate from the sides, and again, you want at least some ventilation in there. Poultry. I've had a number of discussions with clients, again, not a chicken guy, but I have a lot of clients with chickens that ask questions. I try my best to educate and understand. This is an option. You can get a whole flock of, it's apparently out there. You can get sweaters for your chickens. There are lots of pictures. As far as the chickens, moisture is your enemy, because if you start increasing the humidity within your coop and you drop those freezing temperatures, you're going to start creating frostbite. because you actually are frosting over, especially the combs and the toes of the chickens. If you're seeing condensation within your coop, you're not having enough ventilation. The other thing, you're probably a little high on your droppings, and so those need to be cleaned out a little bit more. Found a couple of sources that do recommend about 50% to 70%, no higher than 70% humidity. So if you're a real tech person and you want to use a hygrometer, you can place that in there and make sure you're staying under that 70%. There's definitely a lot of debate out there as far as whether you should or shouldn't put water within the coop. Talking to a couple of people that are more chicken-oriented than I am, veterinarians, their recommendation was not to put water in freezing weather in the coops, because the body heat of the chickens will generate enough heat to start an evaporative process and actually create more moisture in the coop. And then sand in your litter can help dissipate your moisture as well. And in the coop, ventilation is key. Your ventilation should always be higher than your roosts, as close to the top of the coop as you can. And I'll let Jeff kind of talk about how to heat a coop if you really want to heat the coop. But I found it interesting that if you start increasing your heat, you can actually affect the health of your hens, because they won't want to leave the warm coop out into the cold air. And so their productivity starts going down. You start having light issues, less exercise. You actually decrease your egg laying productivity. And they stay in there, so therefore you're leaving more droppings within the coop. You're back to the moisture problem. So the other part that is probably the most important in my hands is water. Water access for the horses, the cows, the pigs, the chickens, it doesn't matter. Horses can go days without feed. They can't go much more than about 24 hours without water. And you're gonna have a bellyache if you freeze your water for more than about 5 or 6 hours. Chickens, you start affecting egg production. Cattle, sickness, generally, and from a production standpoint, you start losing weight gains, because if they're left to eating snow, they're going to burn calories to melt that snow, therefore you're not gaining your weight. And from Jeff's side, that will really start making sense as far as why we're here in this environment with Evergreen Fire, to try and, again, it's up to everybody as far as how you want to approach blanketing, heating your barn, heating your coop, but we've got to keep the water open for all of these animals, and that takes electricity here in Colorado. There are propane options out there, but as a side conversation this afternoon, not something I'm a big fan of.